Keanu Reeves was set to appear as a guest on The Jessica Lange Show, a talk show known for its sharp, no-nonsense interviewing style. Hosted by Jessica Lange, a journalist celebrated for her ability to push celebrities to their limits, the show had gained a reputation for cutting through the polished facades of Hollywood's biggest stars. Jessica prided herself on asking the tough questions, the ones that made headlines, stirred controversy, and, most importantly, kept her audience engaged. However, tonight's guest was not just any Hollywood A-lister. He was Keanu Reeves, an actor beloved not only for his blockbuster roles but for his remarkable humility, kindness, and generosity. As the studio audience buzzed with excitement, the lights dimmed, and the show's signature theme played over the speakers. On the massive screen above the stage, bold white letters flashed, "Keanu Reeves, live in studio." The crowd erupted in applause. Some fans held up signs that read, "Keanu, you inspire us," while others simply clapped, eager to hear what he had to say. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Keanu had never been one to chase the spotlight. He carried himself differently, with a quiet strength that set him apart in an industry built on ego and spectacle. Backstage, Keanu adjusted his blazer and took a deep breath. He wasn't here to promote a movie or engage in a battle of wits. He believed in real conversations, in human connection. Yet, something about this interview felt different. His instincts told him that Jessica Lange wasn't looking for a casual chat, she wanted a moment, a headline, a confrontation. As his name was announced and he stepped onto the stage, the energy in the room shifted. The battle of perspectives was about to begin. From the moment Keanu Reeves took his seat across from Jessica Lange, it was clear that this wasn't going to be an easy interview. Jessica, dressed in a sleek, tailored suit, exuded confidence and control. She gripped her cue cards like weapons, flipping through them with precision as if preparing for battle. Unlike other hosts who might ease their guests into a conversation with pleasantries, Jessica wasted no time. She leaned forward, her piercing gaze fixed on Keanu. "You're one of the biggest stars in Hollywood," she began, her voice steady but laced with skepticism. "You have more wealth than most people could dream of, yet you choose to live like an ordinary man. You take the subway, you give away millions, you avoid the spotlight. Don't you think that's just an act?" A murmur ran through the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the confrontational nature of the question. Others leaned in, eager to see how Keanu would respond. It was clear that Jessica wasn't interested in celebrating his humility, she wanted to challenge it, to expose what she assumed must be a contradiction. Keanu, however, remained unshaken. He tilted his head slightly, a small but knowing smile forming on his lips. Instead of rushing to defend himself, he let the moment breathe. Then, in his signature calm and reflective tone, he asked, "Jessica, have you ever thought about how many people feel invisible every day?" Jessica raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the unexpected turn in his response. She had expected him to justify his choices, maybe even get flustered. Instead, he had taken her question and turned it into something deeper. The audience fell silent, absorbing his words. Not one to back down, Jessica quickly moved on to her next attack. "That's a noble sentiment," she admitted, her voice tinged with skepticism. "But let's be real here, Keanu. You're a multimillionaire. You don't have to worry about rent, medical bills, or putting food on the table. How can you claim to understand the struggles of everyday people when you live in a completely different world?" The crowd murmured again. This was the moment Jessica had been waiting for, the moment to corner him, to push him into admitting that his life of privilege separated him from the struggles of the average person. But once again, Keanu didn't flinch. He sighed softly, as if saddened by the question itself, and responded with quiet sincerity. "You're right," he acknowledged, nodding slightly. "I don't have to worry about those things anymore. I am privileged, and I acknowledge that." Jessica's smirk grew slightly, sensing a small victory, but Keanu wasn't done. His voice took on a deeper, more emotional tone. But privilege doesn't mean I forget where I came from. I remember struggling. I remember sleeping on friends' couches, working odd jobs just to get by. I remember pain. I remember loss. The room grew heavy with silence. Even Jessica, who had prepared for this exact moment, looked momentarily unsettled. Keanu had not only owned his privilege, he had turned it into a moment of truth that resonated far beyond the walls of the studio. The interview had started as a confrontation, but now, it was becoming something else entirely. Jessica Lange had come prepared. She had built her career on pressing celebrities into uncomfortable corners, exposing contradictions, and turning vulnerability into headline-worthy moments. But Keanu Reeves was proving to be unlike any guest she had ever faced. He didn't dodge her questions. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he met every provocation with quiet wisdom, turning each challenge into an opportunity for reflection. Jessica wasn't ready to give up. She leaned forward, flipping through her cue cards with the precision of a seasoned interrogator. "Let's talk about pain," she said, her voice lowering, as if preparing to strike at the heart of something deeper. "You've lost so much. Your best friend, your fiancé, your child. Didn't that destroy you? Or do you just pretend it doesn't affect you?" A gasp rippled through the audience. Even for a journalist known for her sharp edge, this was brutal. Some members of the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others sat in stunned silence, waiting to see how Keanu would respond. This was the moment Jessica had been building toward, the moment she hoped would finally break him. Keanu closed his eyes for a brief second, as if absorbing the weight of the question. When he reopened them, his gaze was calm, steady, and filled with something unexpected, not anger, not frustration, but understanding. His fingers traced the edge of his chair lightly before he spoke. "Pain never destroyed me, Jessica," he said, his voice soft yet unwavering. It taught me that nothing is permanent, that every moment matters. And that true love that is real, never disappears." The studio was silent. Some audience members wiped away tears. Even Jessica, who had spent years perfecting the art of detachment, seemed momentarily disarmed. She had expected Keanu to either crumble or deflect. Instead, he had transformed her attack into something beautiful, something undeniable. But Jessica wasn't ready to back down completely. She straightened her back, feigning amusement, and flipped to her next question. "That's poetic, Keanu," she said, her smirk returning. "But let's be honest, Hollywood doesn't care about poetry. You're over 50 now. This industry is obsessed with youth. Don't you fear becoming irrelevant?" The shift in the audience was immediate. A murmur ran through the crowd, and some people scoffed at the bluntness of the question. Hollywood was notorious for discarding aging actors, especially those who had built their careers on action roles. Jessica believed she had found his weak spot. But Keanu didn't react with defensiveness or frustration. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Then, after a pause that stretched the moment, he asked, "Jessica, have you ever watched a sunset?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked, momentarily thrown. "Excuse me?" she asked, skeptical. Keanu leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his words carrying quiet depth. "A sunset," he repeated. "Have you ever heard anyone call it irrelevant just because the night is coming?" The audience erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was thunderous, rolling through the studio like a wave. Some people stood up, whistling and cheering. Others sat in stunned silence, reflecting on what he had just said. For the first time in her career, Jessica Lange was speechless. She had spent years controlling the narrative, crafting questions designed to shake her guests, but Keanu had taken the very premise of her argument and turned it into something profound. He had reframed aging, not as a decline, but as something inevitable and beautiful. Jessica, regaining her composure, forced a chuckle. That's a nice metaphor, Keanu, she said, shaking her head. But let's be real, you're not a sunset. You're a man in an industry that values youth above all else. Do you really believe Hollywood will still have a place for you in 10, 20 years? Keanu let out a small sigh, his expression thoughtful. Hollywood isn't forever, Jessica, he said simply. But kindness is. Integrity is. The way we treat people, that lasts far longer than any movie ever will. Another wave of applause. This time, it wasn't just admiration, it was respect. Even Jessica could feel the energy in the room shifting. She had set out to challenge Keanu, to make him confront uncomfortable truths. Instead, he had challenged her. She flipped through her cue cards again, but her fingers hesitated. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, waiting to see what she would say next. And that was when she realized something unsettling: she had nothing left. Every angle, every carefully planned attack, had been turned into something greater than she could control. For the first time, she did something unexpected. She laughed. A quiet, almost incredulous laugh. She set her cue cards down on the table, resting her hands over them, and looked at Keanu with genuine curiosity. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. Keanu's smile deepened. "Few people are." The audience roared with approval. It wasn't just about the interview anymore. It was about the power of grace, of wisdom, of choosing to rise above cynicism. And for the first time, Jessica Lange found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew. As the interview progressed, something was shifting, not just in the atmosphere of the studio, but in Jessica Lange herself. She had come into this interview prepared to challenge Keanu Reeves, to peel back what she believed was a carefully crafted persona of humility and wisdom. She had expected him to stumble, to contradict himself, to reveal the flaws beneath his image. But instead, she was the one being confronted, not by Keanu directly, but by the truth in his words. She had thrown her hardest questions at him, about his wealth, his humility, his past pain, and even his aging in an industry obsessed with youth. Every time, he responded with a grace and sincerity that left the audience, and even Jessica, caught off guard. He didn't deny his privilege, nor did he use it as a shield. He didn't run from his pain, nor did he allow it to define him. Instead, he transformed each question into a lesson, one that resonated far beyond the walls of the studio. But then came the final question, the one Jessica had been holding on to, the one meant to strip away everything and expose the vulnerability beneath. She took a breath, steadied herself, and asked, "You've spent your life giving, supporting, inspiring people. But let's be honest, Keanu, what if no one remembers you when you're gone?" The audience fell silent. Even the murmurs of quiet reactions that had followed previous exchanges had disappeared. This was it, the existential question, the one that forced people to confront their own mortality, their own fears of being forgotten. Jessica had used this question before. It rattled people. It forced them to admit the uncomfortable truth that no matter how much they achieved, time would eventually move on without them. But Keanu? He didn't look shaken. He didn't even hesitate. Instead, he smiled, a small, knowing smile, as if he had already anticipated this moment. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with warmth. "Jessica," he said, tilting his head slightly, "you're asking the wrong question." Jessica's lips parted slightly, caught off guard. The audience sat motionless, their eyes darting between them. Keanu continued, his words deliberate and profound. "The question isn't whether or not people will remember me when I'm gone," he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of his words to settle. "The question is, what will they remember about you?" A ripple moved through the studio. It was as if a single sentence had rewritten the entire atmosphere. Jessica Lange, who had built her career on making others uncomfortable, on exposing their weaknesses, was suddenly the one exposed. And not by Keanu, not by the audience, but by herself. Her fingers tightened around the cue cards in her lap, but for the first time, she didn't look down at them. She didn't need to. She knew that for the first time in her entire career, she had nothing left to say. She had spent years dissecting people, pressing them, forcing them to answer questions designed to unravel them. But Keanu had done something she had never seen before. He hadn't fought back. He hadn't played the game. Instead, he had simply told the truth. And the truth was beautiful. Jessica swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the cameras still rolling, of the millions of people who would see this moment. She had spent so much of her life controlling the narrative, controlling how she was perceived, ensuring that she was always the one in power. But right now, she didn't care about power. She didn't care about control. A quiet, involuntary breath escaped her lips. It wasn't a sigh of frustration or defeat, it was something else. Something closer to release. Then, before she even realized what she was doing, she laughed. Not a cold, sarcastic laugh. Not a mocking laugh meant to regain control of the conversation. It was a real laugh, honest, breathless, almost disbelieving. She leaned back in her chair, shaking her head slightly. "You got me," she admitted, her voice softer than it had been throughout the entire interview. "I think I needed to hear that." The audience erupted, not in laughter, not in shock, but in applause. Because they had needed to hear it, too. Jessica wasn't the only one in that room who had spent so much time chasing something, fame, success, recognition, without ever stopping to ask what it all really meant. Keanu simply sat there, smiling softly, letting the moment unfold. He wasn't basking in some kind of victory. He hadn't come here to win. He had come here to share something real. Jessica exhaled one last time, then turned to the audience. She had one final thing to say, and for the first time, she didn't need her cue cards to say it. She took the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and said, "I came into this interview thinking I was going to challenge Keanu Reeves." She paused, letting the moment breathe. "But I think Keanu Reeves just challenged me." The studio erupted in applause once more. The camera zoomed in on Jessica's face, not the face of a hardened journalist looking for a headline, but of a woman who had just experienced something real. And for the first time in a long, long time, Jessica Lange smiled. Not for the cameras. Not for the ratings. But for herself. The interview was over, but its effect was only just beginning. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew began wrapping up, there was an energy in the air that refused to fade. The audience didn't rush to leave. Instead, they lingered, exchanging glances, processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just another celebrity interview. It wasn't a sensational takedown or a viral controversy. It was something deeper, something real. Keanu Reeves had done what few had ever managed to do. He had taken a conversation designed to challenge him and had transformed it into something profound, something that left people questioning themselves rather than him. And at the heart of it all was Jessica Lange, a journalist who had spent her career controlling narratives, suddenly finding herself confronted with a truth she hadn't expected. As Keanu stood to leave, he didn't look to the cameras, didn't soak in the applause. Instead, he turned to Jessica, offering her a simple but meaningful nod. "Take care of yourself, Jessica," he said softly. Then, with his hands in his pockets, he walked off stage. Jessica remained seated for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from her. She should have been moving, thanking the audience, closing the show with the same polished professionalism she had always maintained. But she couldn't. Something in her had shifted, and she wasn't sure what to do with it just yet. By the time the world woke up the next morning, the interview had already gone viral. Clips of Keanu's responses flooded social media. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram were filled with discussions, reactions, and personal reflections. Headlines appeared across major news outlets. Some praised Keanu for his wisdom and grace. Others dissected Jessica's approach, debating whether she had been humbled or exposed. But beyond the headlines and online debates, something even more powerful was happening. People weren't just watching the interview, they were feeling it. They were reflecting on their own lives, their own perspectives. A single mother posted on Facebook, "I've been so angry at the world, at my struggles. But last night, Keanu said something that changed me. Pain never destroyed me, it taught me. I sat with that for hours. Maybe I've been seeing my hardships all wrong." A retired soldier commented on Twitter, "I used to be afraid of being forgotten. But when Keanu compared aging to a sunset, I realized, we don't lose value just because time passes. We gain something deeper. Thank you, Keanu. I needed that." But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from Jessica Lange herself. For the first time in her career, she didn't immediately fire back. She didn't release a statement defending her approach. She didn't try to reclaim control of the narrative. Instead, she posted just one simple message on her personal account. "What will they remember about me?" No context. No explanation. But the world knew exactly what she meant. The comments section exploded with thousands of reactions. Some were critical, others supportive, but through the noise, one thing became clear: Jessica had been changed. Keanu hadn't just won an interview. He had shifted a perspective. In the days that followed, the conversation continued. Psychologists wrote articles analyzing Keanu's ability to deflect aggression with wisdom. Spiritual leaders discussed the depth of his reflections. Everyday people took moments to reconsider how they spoke to others, how they handled pain, how they defined their own legacy. And through it all, Keanu remained silent. He didn't comment on the interview. He didn't acknowledge the viral frenzy. He simply continued on with his life, as if nothing had happened. But that was the thing about moments like these. They didn't need to be explained. They simply lived on in the people they touched. The interview between Keanu Reeves and Jessica Lange was more than just a conversation, it was a masterclass in grace, wisdom, and the power of perspective. In a world where confrontation and controversy often take center stage, Keanu reminded us of something far more important: kindness and self-awareness are stronger than aggression. He didn't fight back with anger or defensiveness. He didn't try to prove anything. Instead, he turned every challenge into a moment of reflection, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. His response to pain was not bitterness, but understanding. His response to privilege was not denial, but acknowledgement. His response to aging was not fear, but acceptance. And perhaps most importantly, his response to the fear of being forgotten was a question that resonated with millions: what will they remember about you? The real lesson here isn't just about Keanu Reeves. It's about how we choose to live, how we treat others, and what we leave behind. Because in the end, our legacy isn't in the fame we achieve or the wealth we accumulate, it's in the impact we have on the people around us.